This morning we hear a gospel story that's really a story within a story, a miracle within a miracle, two stories that are different and yet related, intertwined. There are some major differences between these two characters, these two girls, women who are healed, the two people who come to ask for healing from Jesus. The first who comes is this man, Jairus. He comes asking for help for his daughter, knowing that his daughter seems like she is in a very desperate situation. The fact that he is a man and the other who comes to ask for help is a woman is very, very significant in this story, because in this culture, in this time, he would have automatically had power. She would have not. Again, here in this story, we know that he has power. He has a certain amount of regard in the community because he's given a name. We remember the stories of people who have names much easier than we remember those who aren't named in the text. Doesn't necessarily mean that there are no women of faith mentioned in the Bible. There are many, many women of faith mentioned. But often they're like this woman, unnamed. Another difference between these two people who ask for healing is that he, we're told, is a leader of the synagogue. He's in a position of power. The synagogue would have been the place where community happened, would have been the place where people came together to hear the gossip, to worship, to hear the stories of God and what God had done for the Israelite people, to provide sacrifices. It would have been the place where marriages and funerals took place, just like our own church. She, on the other hand, is unclean. And because she had been hemorrhaging for many, many years, she wouldn't have even been able to cross the threshold of the synagogue. She wouldn't be allowed to participate in that community, would have been to some degree distanced from even her closest friends and relatives, because if you so much as touched a person who was bleeding in this way, you would have been unclean, and that would have transferred to the person who was doing the touching. And so there would have been circumstances where she wouldn't have even been allowed to hug the ones that she loved. Another difference, this man, we assume, would have had some power, would have had wealth. She, on the other hand, had spent all that she had, trying desperately to be cured. And a final difference, he comes to Jesus in the proper way, kneeling before Jesus, worshiping, asking him for healing. She, on the other hand, rather surreptitiously, as if she doesn't even want to be seen or noticed or recognized, reaches out in this anonymous crowd to just grab just a little piece of Jesus and what she expected him to provide. She does so in this kind of cloak of darkness. But despite these differences, in this story, there are a lot of similarities where the two characters are brought together. Both are in desperate need. I find that when we're in need of healing, there's not a whole lot of difference between people who have millions of dollars in their bank accounts and people who have nothing. We all look just about the same in a hospital gown. There's not a lot of hiding that can happen when we are so desperate for help. When we're faced with dire consequences, or when we're suddenly sitting in front of a doctor hearing a diagnosis we don't want to hear, all of a sudden, we're on the same level. Human suffering is human suffering. No one can escape. Another similarity between these two different characters is that both ask for healing. In the Greek here, this word is salveo. Salvation and healing are very closely tied together. We can't really even tell the difference. Whether they're asking for salvation or whether they're asking for healing, they know that they need God's presence in their life more than just physically. But they need that hope, that faith that God provides us. And we know that both of these people are experiencing fear. Both are afraid of what's going to happen. And I find in this story that what many pastors have said to me through the years is true. That the opposite of faith is not necessarily just doubt, but fear. That it's very difficult for us to hold faith and fear together. But here these two characters act both out of faith and out of fear, knowing that God will provide them some sort of a solution. I find that fear cripples us. Let's see, I went a little louder there. I find that fear cripples us. Fear makes us unable to act. Even when we know that God is calling us, even when we know that God is really reaching to us, that sometimes fear makes it impossible for us to act in the ways that we know that God wants us to act. I was moved this week to hear a story from 1957, from the Little Rock Nine, as they're called. One of the Little Rock Nine was named Melba Joy Patillo. Joy, right in the middle of her name. I love that. And she talks about how she was moved when her teacher asked if any of the students in her high school class, an all-black class, would like to go to Little Rock Central High School the next year. She immediately raised her hand. She saw going to this high school as a way out of her community, as a way out of Little Rock to be able to go on to the university. She saw going to a better high school as a way to help bring about God's vision of a diverse world. She saw this as a way that she could step forward. And she says that she really had not experienced true fear in her life to that point. And so she was part of that group of 9 students, with the famous pictures of them standing in front of the high school protected by the National Guard as they went into the school for the very first time as a group of black students coming into this white university, or white high school. And she endured a whole year of very difficult circumstances. She talks about having girls light pieces of paper on fire and throw them over the stall into where she was sitting. She talks about having acid thrown in her face. And finally, at the end of the year, in a desperate and very evil plea, the governor found a way to shut down the high school. He shut it down completely, turned it into a private high school so that the segregation policy could remain in place. And together with her grandmother and her mother, they realized they had to figure out a way for her to finish her senior year of high school. She did about a year just in tutoring, and then finally they found through the NAACP a family who would host her in California. I can't imagine what it was like to go from Little Rock, Arkansas, to be going to California by yourself as a young 17-year-old woman. But she did it, knowing that there would be a family who would welcome her there. But the family who picked her up, who welcomed her, was white. She said she was actually terrified that she had been kidnapped by some group that was going to take her into the woods and make good on some of the threats that had been made to her and her family. But she found very quickly that this family, the McCabe family, George and Kay, and their daughters Judy and Joni, wanted nothing but to welcome her into her family. She found this vision of radical grace and radical integration in California that she could never even imagine growing up in Arkansas. She found people who genuinely wanted to include her and wanted her to be part of their family. She said one of the first things that happened was that the mother, Kay McCabe, shoved a chart in her face and said, "Pick a day, we all do chores around here." She thought maybe there had been a mistake and she was supposed to serve as the maid for the year. But she signed up just like everyone else, was included in the family. She writes, "Finally I understood. My true home wasn't a particular place or even with particular people. It was with God. He gave me the vision to see beyond what segregated society dictated. He had given me the courage to raise my hand and to enter Central High School. He would keep giving me the strength and the support I needed to follow my own path. The father of her new surrogate family happened to be a professor at a university close by. And so he invited her one day and said, I think really you're ready for college, that the high school classes are not challenging enough for you anymore. And she goes on to write, he went with me to the campus on my first day. And he said to me, Melba, you can make your life into whatever you want it to be. He said, Kay and I are here for you if you need us. Remember, you're never anything less than our daughter, never anything less than an important human being, a person who had strength to set this country on its ear and teach it a lesson in civil rights. You're never anything less than our daughter. Another thing that these two very different stories, two very different characters have in common is that both are called daughter. In God's eyes, both are unique, important human beings, deserving of God's love and God's healing. We are called to be people of hope and faith. Whatever struggles you are going through today, God has called you His precious son, His precious daughter. Go out in good courage, be of good faith, and have no fear. Amen.